Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. So today we're going to start our third part of the ecology notes. And today we're going to really focus in on nutrients. So when we were talking in part two about how energy moves through the ecosystem, it really is in a stepwise progression from one trophic level to the next. And when we reach the top of that food chain or that food web, the energy has pretty much been exhausted to the point where there's just not enough to continue sustaining it. It's not something that gets looped back to the bottom of that chain. It is very much all produced by the autotrophs at the bottom and gets used up from one trophic level to the next. Today we're going to talk about nutrients instead, and the big difference here is while energy gets consumed and used up, the nutrients are capable of changing forms as well, but they can then get recycled back to the bottom of the food chain and continue to sustain themselves. So while energy flows, nutrients cycle. There is a limited supply of each amount on Earth, and without these cycles, these nutrients would eventually run out. And so it's a really good thing that we are capable of transforming and recycling nutrients in our ecosystem, and it's a really important thing that that continues to work. So when we look at nutrient cycles, you often come across this term called a biogeochemical cycle. And break this term down, when we look at bio or life, geo as sort of earth or non-living things, and chemicals. So we're cycling these materials through both abiotic factors in our ecosystem, soil, air, potentially dissolved in water, right? As well as between living or biological components, so living things. Cycles that we are going to focus on, although there are many of them, these are the big ones, are your hydrologic cycle, or what you probably learned somewhere in elementary or middle school as your water cycle. We'll talk about the carbon-oxygen cycles. Some texts and some people split those into two cycles. Some of them combine them. We'll sort of see why you could do one or the other, depending on how detail-oriented you want to get with that particular set of compounds. We'll talk about the nitrogen cycle, and then as well as the phosphorus cycle. And if you start looking through some of those elements, perhaps something starts ringing a bell here. Because when you talk about the importance of these nutrient cycles, it really is those big major elements that we talked about when we talked about your macromolecules. Why are we moving these materials and why are they so important for living things? Because we need those elements in order to build carbohydrates, in order to build lipids, in order to process proteins and create nucleic acids. All of those are based on some very fundamental elements. And so we're going to see how we move those elements and those compounds through our ecosystems, both on a biological side of things, the living side, as well as the abiotic or the sort of geologic component to that. So when we look at nutrient cycles, we'll talk about specifics of each, but in general, those nutrient cycles really sort of fall into three particular steps. First and foremost, your producers are really going to be the ones who are vitally important for incorporating those chemicals from the non-living environment, the geologic component, the abiotic side of the ecosystem, into organic compounds that then living organisms, both themselves and those who then eat up the food chain, are able to use. Consumers then feed on those producers and incorporate some of those chemicals into their own body, and they will also then end up releasing some of those chemicals back as waste products, whether it be literally in things like feces or urine, or in the air that they breathe back out to the environment, or eventually those organisms die. And so decomposers are also going to play a huge role in continuing this nutrients being recycled, because those decomposers then are capable of breaking down those compounds back and releasing them into things like the soil and the water and the air, back into sort of more inorganic forms that then continue the cycle on the way. Producers then gain those renewable supplies of raw materials from those decomposers and from those inorganic abiotic sources like the soil and the water, to then continue allowing that cycle to reloop and building new organic matter for their prospective food chains.